For the vast majority of human history, we were far from alone. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive into a pretty wild reality. Picture this. If you could hop in a time machine and travel back, you wouldn't just find a younger version of our world. You would find a planet where multiple, completely distinct human species were walking the Earth at the exact same time. Some of them looked a lot like us, while others were built totally differently, shaped by harsh, brutal landscapes that would frankly break a modern person in a heartbeat. So it begs a pretty massive question. Why are we the only ones left? Because just 50,000 years ago, which is honestly a total blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, we shared this planet with several other remarkably adapted human species. And today, it's just us. We are the only human species left standing. And get this, it's not necessarily because we were the strongest, or the absolute smartest, or even the ones who had been here the longest. We are simply the ones who are still here. And that leaves us with a profound mystery. What exactly happened to everyone else? When you actually map out our evolutionary history, our solitary existence today is a huge anomaly. Think about it. 2 million years ago, Homo erectus shows up. 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals are thriving. And then we hit this massive overlap around 50,000 years ago where multiple species are just coexisting. Our current status, being the solitary humans on Earth, is the exception, not the rule. To figure out how that all played out, we really have to look at the slow, fascinating, and incredibly messy reality of human history. To start unraveling this mystery, let's open our first case file on the ultimate long haulers, Homo erectus. 2 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is how many years ago they first appeared. To put that staggering time frame into perspective, think about literally everything modern humans have ever accomplished. Every city we've ever built, every single war, every language ever spoken. All of that entire shebang fits inside just the last few thousand years. Homo erectus was walking this planet for a stretch of time so unbelievably long that our entire modern history looks like a tiny little footnote next to theirs. These guys were the ultimate survivors. Their bodies were the first to look really recognizably human, purpose-built with long legs and a frame perfectly designed for trekking across open ground. They were the very first human species to pack up and leave Africa, expanding into wild environments they hadn't even evolved for. And their brains, while definitely smaller than ours, were a huge leap forward. They developed these incredible stone tools that barely changed over hundreds of thousands of years. Now, I know that might sound like they lacked imagination, but it's actually the exact opposite. Those tools worked so flawlessly for what they needed that they felt absolutely zero pressure to change them. But here's the thing. Even outlasting everything the planet threw at them wasn't quite enough in the end. By their final chapter, the world had simply moved on without them. Their last known populations ended up cut off on the Indonesian island of Java. Trapped there, they had absolutely no way to reach other groups, nowhere new to expand. The forests they had successfully hunted in for generations just began to shrink, and their food sources dried up. Without enough people or space to recover, this remarkably resilient species that had roughed it for nearly 2 million years just slowly starved out, quietly fading into the earth around 110,000 years ago. But longevity isn't the whole story, right? Let's talk about Neanderthals, probably the single most misunderstood branch of our family tree. You really have to forget that whole myth of the dim, brutish caveman swinging a club. The reality is completely different. They were highly intelligent. In fact, their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They mastered fire, they crafted incredibly sophisticated tools, and there's growing evidence that they actually buried their dead with genuine care and intention. Physically, they were absolute units, completely built for Ice Age survival. Compact, thick bones, wide chests, and large noses that literally functioned as heaters to warm up freezing air before it hit their lungs. But living in their world was brutally hard. They hunted massive, highly dangerous Ice Age animals at unbelievably close range. Because of this, when scientists examine their skeletons today, they find injury patterns that almost perfectly match those of modern professional rodeo riders. They were literally putting their bodies on the absolute line every single day just to secure their next meal. So, how did they disappear? Well, they weren't suddenly wiped out by one massive, dramatic catastrophe. Around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began moving into their territories in Europe and Western Asia. We actually lived side by side for a few thousand years, and DNA proves our species even interbred. But our arrival meant fierce competition for the exact same land and the exact same animals. Combine that pressure with a wildly unpredictable shifting climate and the fact that Neanderthals tended to live in small, isolated populations with really low genetic diversity, well, you get a slow, messy extinction. By 40,000 years ago, they had completely faded from the fossil record. Okay, next up on the docket are the incredibly mysterious Denisovans. And they are completely wild because we can barely even see them in the physical record. Their entire discovery kicked off with a single tiny finger bone pulled from a freezing cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. I mean, it was a fragment so impossibly small it could sit right in the center of your palm. But when scientists managed to extract DNA from it, it didn't match Neanderthals, it didn't match us, it was an entirely new, hidden branch of the human family tree. To this day, they've left behind almost zero physical fossils. Literally just that little finger bone, a few teeth, maybe a piece of jawbone. Yet, their genetic shadow is absolutely enormous. This phantom species is still walking around in our genetic code right now. Denisovan ancestry shows up in modern populations across parts of Asia and Oceania, with some modern Melanesian groups carrying up to a staggering 6% Denisovan DNA. And get this, it's not just dormant leftover DNA. It is actively helping people survive today. Modern Tibetans actually inherited a specific Denisovan gene called EPAS1. This incredible genetic gift allows them to function perfectly at extreme, freezing altitudes where most modern human bodies would just start to shut down. It is absolutely mind-blowing that a phantom species we can barely find in the dirt is actively shaping how living humans survive in thin air, but as their own distinct living population, they were likely spread way too thin, fading out somewhere around 30,000 years ago. Now, this brings us to a totally bizarre evolutionary phenomenon called island dwarfism. When species are isolated on islands for thousands of years, evolution gets highly creative. Honestly, it's like nature just starts making things up. Large animals, dealing with limited food, evolve to shrink down, while normally small animals can grow to enormous sizes. Understanding this quirky little rule perfectly explains our strangest and most surprising suspect, Homo floresiensis. Discovered back in 2003 on the Indonesian island of Flores, these individuals were unlike anything we had ever seen. Thanks to island dwarfism, they evolved to stand barely 3 feet tall, with brains roughly the size of a grapefruit. And their environment? It was like something straight out of a bizarre sci-fi movie. These tiny humans were running around alongside giant, towering storks, terrifying Komodo dragons, and actual literal dwarf elephants. Their tools show they survived on that wild island until about 50,000 years ago, which, interestingly enough, is exactly when modern humans were showing up in the region. Once again, a small population facing intense new pressures simply ran out of time. All of this really forces us to ask the million-dollar question. If Neanderthals were highly intelligent and Denisovans were incredibly adaptable to extreme environments, and Homo erectus literally outlasted us by millions of years, why on earth did Homo sapiens survive while the rest vanished? The obvious answer people always want to jump to is just, well, we were smarter. But as we've seen, that argument falls apart pretty quickly. The answer really seems to come down to contrasting survival strategies. Look, while other human species, like the Neanderthals, generally lived in smaller, highly isolated groups, Homo sapiens did something fundamentally different. We didn't just live in our own little bubbles, we built incredibly wide, interconnected social networks. We connected across vast distances in a way no other human species ever really managed. Because of these huge networks, we shared everything: resources, tools, techniques, and most importantly, knowledge. When a disaster wiped out a specific area, the things that community had learned didn't just die with them. That knowledge had already traveled to the next group over. This gave us unmatched flexibility. When the climate shifted, we weren't locked into a single place or a single strategy. We could dynamically reorganize. Though, to be completely fair to the scientific record, we also benefited immensely from pure timing, geography, and a whole lot of sheer luck. We weren't necessarily destined to be the last one standing, we just happened to be. If there is one core takeaway from this whole explainer, it's this. These other humans weren't just rough drafts of us. They weren't mere stepping stones on some inevitable path to Homo sapiens. They were their own distinct, incredible kinds of humans, each with a totally unique way of surviving and thriving. The fact that we are the only ones left is a profound, messy mystery. And it really leaves you looking at our modern, solitary world and wondering, what would human society look like today if even one of our sibling species had survived alongside us?